Mothman of Point Pleasant Lives. Heart-stopping horror, Appalachian Mountain Chapter 1. Arrival in Point Pleasant. The cold autumn wind sent whispers through the dying trees, painting an eerie welcome for Jeffries as he pulled into the outskirts of Point Pleasant. His car's headlights cut through the enveloping darkness, revealing the faint outlines of old homes and rusted mailboxes, some of which bore the weight of years without being opened. He had heard about this place. As a journalist who had spent the better part of a decade debunking supernatural occurrences and urban legends, Point Pleasant was a curious blip on his radar, home to the Mothman Festival, where thousands gathered to celebrate a legend Jeffries was certain was fabricated. Checking into a local motel, he was met with curious glances from the inhabitants. The motel clerk, an old man with a deeply lined face and white, bushy eyebrows, handed him a key with a peculiar smile. "You here for the Mothman, Sonny?" Jeffries chuckled, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "Partially. I'm writing an article on local legends." The clerk's gaze darkened. "That ain't no legend, boy. It's as real as you and me. Seen it myself back in '66. Those eyes, they ain't something you forget." The offhand comment gave Jeffries pause, but he dismissed it, attributing it to the theatrics of a town that made money off the legend. "Thanks for the tip," he responded, shifting his briefcase to his other hand. By the time he unpacked his belongings in the motel room, night had fully settled over Point Pleasant. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, its call echoing in the stillness. The room itself was a time capsule from the 1970s, with its patterned wallpaper, old tube TV, and a slight musty smell that clung to the curtains. Jeffries began typing away on his laptop, researching the events that had occurred in 1966, when the town had first been gripped by the terror of the Mothman. As he skimmed through articles and witness accounts, his skepticism began to give way to unease. The reports were chillingly consistent, descriptions of a large, winged creature with piercing red eyes that glowed ominously in the night. A sudden knock on the door interrupted his train of thought. Startled, he glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. Who could possibly be visiting at this hour? Another knock, more insistent this time. "Who is it?" Jeffries called out, wariness creeping into his voice. "It's Paulette," a soft voice replied. "From the library? We spoke on the phone earlier about some old articles." Jeffries remembered the phone call. He had arranged to meet Paulette, who had promised to show him a compilation of newspaper clippings from the time of the Mothman sightings. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A young woman with raven black hair and large, inquisitive eyes met his gaze. She clutched a thick binder to her chest, as though it were her lifeline. Opening the door, Jeffries gestured for her to come in. "You're out late. Couldn't this have waited until morning?" Paulette's gaze flitted nervously around the room. "I thought it best we discuss this now," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's been another sighting." "What? When?" "Tonight," she whispered, her eyes widening with fear. "Close to the old TNT area." Jeffries felt a chill run down his spine. "You're serious?" She nodded slowly, opening the binder to reveal a series of black and white photographs, articles, and handwritten notes. "The town never really forgot, you know. Every time someone thinks it's safe, it comes back." Jeffries stared at her, disbelief evident on his face. "But it's just a legend, right? A myth to attract tourists?" Paulette hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of a particularly old photograph. "That's what I once thought too. Until I saw it myself." Her words hung in the air, casting a pall of unease. Outside, the wind began to howl, as if carrying with it the whispered tales of a creature that shouldn't exist, but did. In that moment, The line between myth and reality began to blur for Jeffries, and he realized that Point Pleasant held darker secrets than he had ever imagined. Chapter 2. The Archive of Shadows. The old Point Pleasant Library was a grand, if somewhat decaying, testament to the town's once thriving community. Its wooden floors creaked, the ancient wallpaper was peeling, and the air was dense with the smell of old books and memories. But for Paulette, this was home. She led Jeffries to a back room, marked Restricted Access. Unlocking the door with an old iron key, she hesitated before entering, as if summoning courage from some deep reservoir. Once inside, dim light from the setting sun streamed through dusty windows, revealing shelves lined with old newspapers, journals, and documents. "This," she began, her voice trembling with reverence, "is where the town's secrets are kept. My grandmother curated these archives. She believed in the importance of remembering, no matter how terrifying the memories." Jeffries, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "And you believe all this?" Paulette looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting a world of pain and fear. "After what I've seen, it's hard not to. The stories aren't just tales. They're memories, warnings from the past." She began to walk him through the archives, recounting incidents that went beyond the well-publicized 1966 sightings. There were records of livestock gone missing, unexplained power outages, and chilling accounts of townsfolk who swore they felt an unseen force gripping their hearts, leaving them breathless with terror. "It's said," Paulette whispered, "that Mothman doesn't just watch. It has the power to stop a man's heart with just a thought, to crush his throat without laying a finger on him." Jeffries, trying to hide his growing unease, shot back, "Sounds like urban legends spun out of control. People love a good scare." Paulette stopped, fixing him with a serious gaze. "Then explain this." She handed him an old, tattered journal. The writing inside was shaky, as if penned by a trembling hand. The date at the top read November 15th, 1966. "Saw it again tonight. Those eyes, like burning coals in the abyss. Felt its power, a vice around my heart. I could barely breathe. It's real, and it knows me now." Jeffries swallowed hard, but before he could speak, Paulette continued, "That's my grandmother's handwriting. She was a woman of science, a school teacher. She didn't believe in ghost stories. Until she had her own." Outside, the wind began to pick up, rustling the old papers and making the overhead lights flicker. Jeffries felt the temperature drop. A shadow moved just outside the window, and for a split second, he thought he saw two glowing red eyes. Shaking his head, he attributed it to his overactive imagination. "I need fresh air," he announced abruptly. Exiting the library, Jeffries took a deep breath, trying to shake off the eerie atmosphere of the archives. As he leaned against the building, he was startled by a deep voice behind him. "You shouldn't dig too deep into the town's history. Some things are better left forgotten." Turning around, he found himself face to face with a tall, older man, with grizzled hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to have seen more than their fair share of the world's darkness. "And you are?" The man extended his hand. "Maurice. Town historian and, some would say, its protector." Jeffries looked skeptical. "Protector from what?" Maurice leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "From its past. From the creature that haunts the woods and skies. From the truth." Jeffries felt a shiver run down his spine. "And what truth is that?" Maurice looked around, as if ensuring they were alone, before replying, "That Mothman isn't just a creature of folklore. It's a guardian, a sentinel. It's here for a reason, and if you're not careful, you might just find out why." Before Jeffries could respond, Maurice disappeared into the growing dusk, leaving behind more questions than answers. Returning to his motel, Jeffries tried to shake off the unsettling feelings from the day. He decided to review the photos he had taken of the archives, looking for any clue or pattern. But as he scrolled through the images, he froze. In one of the photos, barely visible behind a stack of old books, were two glowing red eyes, watching him. Outside his window, a lone moth fluttered, casting eerie shadows against the glass, and in the distance, an unsettling cry echoed, making the night even darker. Chapter 3. The eyes in the forest sleep eluded Jeffries. The haunting red eyes in his photographs and the chilling words of both Paulette and Maurice left him tossing and turning. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the curtains, he made a decision. He was going to visit the TNT area, the epicenter of the Mothman sightings. After a quick breakfast at a local diner, where the murmurs and pointed looks of the locals made it clear his inquiries were the talk of the town, he set off. The TNT area, so named for its use as an ammunition storage in World War II, was now an overgrown maze of igloo-like concrete domes, hidden beneath a dense canopy of trees. The forest around it was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call. But as Jeffries ventured deeper, an uneasiness settled over him. He felt watched. Every rustling leaf or snapping twig made him jump. His rational mind tried to quell his rising panic. After all, he was in the creature's supposed territory. Reaching a clearing, he saw one of the old storage domes. The entrance was dark, and as he approached, he felt a sudden drop in temperature. Taking out his flashlight, he ventured inside. The beam of light revealed old machinery, graffiti from brave or foolhardy teenagers, and footprints. Fresh footprints, leading deeper into the dome. Following them, he came to a sudden halt as the beam landed on an old wooden crate. The crate itself was unremarkable, but on it lay a collection of items: a child's torn shoe, a rusted pocket watch, a woman's comb with strands of long black hair still entwined, and an old journal, eerily similar to the one Paulette had shown him. Opening it, Jeffries began to read a fresh entry. It's back. I thought I had escaped it, left it behind in this cursed town. But even in the city, I feel its presence. The grip on my heart, the sensation of being watched. I had to come back, find out the truth. If anyone finds this, know that I tried to warn you. A sudden noise behind him made Jeffries whirl around. The flashlight beam danced over the walls, revealing nothing. But the temperature continued to drop, and his breath now formed visible puffs in the air. Just as he was about to leave, the flashlight flickered and went out. Plunged into darkness, his heart raced. Every sound was magnified. And then, from the depths of the dome, a low, guttural growl echoed, slowly getting closer. Panicking, Jeffries stumbled back, his hands desperately searching for an exit. Just as he felt the cold, open air of the outside, a powerful force gripped him, lifting him off the ground. He struggled, tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, headlights pierced the forest. A car came into view, barreling down the path leading to the domes. The grip around Jeffries loosened, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. As the car skidded to a halt, Paulette jumped out, her eyes wide with fear. I had a feeling you'd come here, she panted. When you didn't answer your phone, I just knew. Jeffries, still trying to process what had just happened, simply nodded. We need to leave. Now. The drive back to town was silent, the weight of the morning's events hanging heavily between them. When they finally spoke, it was in hushed tones, the reality of what lurked in the TNT area settling in. It's real, isn't it? Jeffries finally whispered. Paulette nodded, her grip on the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. Yes. And I think it's trying to tell us something. Back at the motel, Maurice awaited them, a grim look on his face. It seems our curious journalist has had his first true encounter with the Mothman. Jeffries, shaken to his core, could only nod. You're playing a dangerous game, Maurice warned. The Mothman is no mere creature. It's a harbinger, a messenger. And its message is always one of impending doom. As the weight of the historian's words settled in, Jeffries realized that his quest for the truth had only just begun. And the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 4. Whispers in the wind. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red hue across the skies of Point Pleasant. The events of the day had left the town on edge, and a palpable tension hung in the air. Jeffries sat on the porch of his rented motel room, nursing a cup of strong coffee, replaying the events in his mind. As he sipped, he jumped at the sudden touch of a hand on his shoulder. "Easy there," Maurice's deep voice resonated as he took a seat beside the journalist. "You've had quite the introduction to our town's secret. But remember, it's only the beginning." Jeffries sighed, his fingers trembling slightly as he clutched his cup. "What does it want, Maurice? Why does it haunt this town?" The old historian paused, his piercing blue eyes scanning the horizon. "It's a question many have asked, and few have the answers to. But the legends, the old tales, they say the Mothman is a guardian. An entity that exists between realms, warning us of impending disasters." Jeffries gulped. "So, what disaster is it warning us of?" Maurice leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what we need to figure out. But we have to tread carefully. Every step closer to the truth is a step closer to its wrath." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Polity's car. The tires screeched to a halt, and she rushed out, her face a mask of worry. "It's happening again," she panted. "Strange occurrences all over town. Lights flickering, animals acting up, and those eyes. People are seeing them everywhere." Maurice and Jeffries exchanged concerned glances. The historian stood up, determination etched on his face. "We need to get to the heart of this. The old Henderson farm. That's where the first sightings were reported." The trio quickly made their way to the farm, the night around them thick with an oppressive atmosphere. The old barn stood desolate, a sentinel of past memories. As they approached, a chill ran down their spines. The barn door creaked slowly open, revealing the inky darkness within. Maurice lit a lantern, its dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. Inside, the barn was eerily quiet, the only sound being their own breaths and the soft thud of their footsteps on the wooden floor. On the far wall, drawn in what looked like ash, was the silhouette of the Mothman. Its eyes, two glowing orbs, seemed to pierce through them. Below it, inscriptions in a language none of them recognized. This is old. Ancient, even," Maurice murmured, tracing the symbols with his fingers. Jeffries, his reporter instincts kicking in, began to snap photos. But as the flash illuminated the barn, a gust of wind blew out the lantern. The darkness was absolute. A soft whisper, like the rustling of leaves, echoed through the barn. Words, though indistinct, seemed to be repeated. Over and over. Paulette, clutching Jeffrey's arm, whispered, "Can you hear it?" "It's a warning." Suddenly, the barn door slammed shut, plunging them into pitch-black silence. The temperature dropped rapidly, their breath visible in the cold air. From the shadows, a guttural growl rumbled, growing louder and more menacing. Jeffries felt a force grip him, pulling him towards the center of the barn. Struggling against the unseen hands, he screamed out, "What do you want?" The whispers grew louder, more urgent. The symbols on the wall began to glow, a soft luminescent blue, illuminating the barn. In the center, a vortex, a whirlpool of energy, began to form. The growls grew louder, more desperate. Maurice, fighting against the pull of the vortex, shouted, "We need to break the connection." The symbols. Thinking quickly, Paulette grabbed a can of paint from a nearby shelf and began to cover the symbols. As she did, the energy in the barn began to dissipate. The vortex weakened, its pull lessening. With one final effort, Maurice and Jefferies, using an old wooden plank, managed to pry the barn door open. Fresh air rushed in, and the oppressive energy vanished. The trio stumbled out, gasping for breath. The night around them was silent once more. "They're not just warnings," Maurice panted. "They're a conduit. A way for the Mothman to enter our world." Jefferies, shaken to his core, looked at the old barn, now silent and desolate. "We need to find out what it wants before it's too late." The night deepened, but the three knew that their quest had only just begun. The secrets of Point Pleasant were unraveling, and they were at the very heart of it. Chapter 5. Shadows of the past. Dawn's light seeped through the trees, bringing a deceptive serenity to Point Pleasant. The events of the previous night still clung to the atmosphere, wrapping the town in an eerie hush. Jefferies had spent the night poring over his notes and photographs, trying to piece together the fragmented puzzle. Every snap of the camera from the barn revealed something new: symbols, shadows, and those haunting red eyes. It was a story bigger than he'd ever imagined. Paulette knocked on his door early. Her face was pale, drawn from lack of sleep. "I've been doing some digging," she began, holding out a tattered book. The cover read, "Point Pleasant, Chronicles of the Unseen." "This has been in my family for generations," she explained. "It's a record of every strange occurrence, every sighting, every encounter." Jefferies leafed through the pages. Newspaper clippings, sketches, and handwritten notes filled the book. One page, marked by a folded corner, caught his eye. It was a sketch of the Mothman, almost identical to the silhouette in the barn. Beside it, a list of dates. All of them correlated with significant disasters: the Silver Bridge collapse, the Chernobyl disaster, the 9/11 attacks. "They say every time it appears, it's a harbinger of doom," Maurice's voice interrupted their thoughts. He stood in the doorway, looking gravely at the book. "But there's more to it than that. The Mothman doesn't just predict these events, it's drawn to them." Jefferies looked up. "So, it's here in Point Pleasant because... Quote. Maurice sighed. "That's what we need to find out. The why. And to do that, we need to delve deeper into the town's history." Their journey led them to the local library, a repository of the town's past. In the dimly lit history section, amidst dusty shelves and ancient tomes, the trio began their research. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, replaced by the pale glow of the library lights. Suddenly, Paulide's voice broke the silence. "Listen to this," she read aloud from an old newspaper clipping. In 1910, a group of miners in Point Pleasant reported seeing a strange creature in the mines. It had red eyes and could predict when the tunnels would collapse. Jefferies leaned in closer. "Does it say where this mine was?" Paulette nodded. "The old McEwen mine, just beyond the TNT area." The pieces were starting to fit together. The Mothman, the TNT area, the mines, they were all interconnected. Determined, they set off for the McEwen mine. The night was moonless, the path illuminated only by their flashlights. The entrance to the mine loomed ahead, a gaping black maw in the hillside. Inside, the walls were damp, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. The beam from their flashlights revealed a labyrinth of tunnels, all leading deeper underground. A soft echo, like a distant heartbeat, pulsed through the caverns. The deeper they ventured, the louder and more insistent it became. As they walked, Polly's flashlight beam caught something on the ground. A helmet, old and rusted, with a headlamp still intact. Beside it, a journal, its pages yellowed with age. She picked it up, flipping to the last entry. "It's been watching us. Those red eyes. Every time we see it, disaster strikes. The tunnels collapse, men get trapped. We're leaving the mine. It's cursed." A shiver ran down Jeffrey's spine. The echoes, now unmistakably the sound of flapping wings, grew louder. Suddenly, the walls of the mine began to shimmer, and the trio found themselves surrounded by a myriad of red eyes, all staring intently at them. The temperature dropped, their breaths forming clouds in the freezing air. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the caverns. "Seekers of truth, why have you come?" Jeffries, summoning all his courage, replied, "We want to know what you are. Why you're here." The eyes blinked, once, twice, and then in unison, they replied, "We are guardians, watchers of the rifts between worlds. We are drawn to moments of great upheaval, to warn, to witness." Paulette whispered, "Are you here to warn us? Is something going to happen to Point Pleasant?" A chilling silence followed, and then the voice replied, "A storm is coming. One that will test the bonds of this world." The red eyes began to fade, the temperature slowly rising. The voice, now distant, echoed, "Beware the water. It holds the key." The mine was silent. Chapter 6. Waters of Deception. The mine's suffocating silence was interrupted only by the trio's heavy breathing. As they retraced their steps out, the warning about water reverberated in their minds. Point Pleasant's proximity to the Ohio River immediately became the focus of their trepidation. As dawn neared, they emerged, squinting against the early morning light filtering through the trees. A faint mist hung over the forest, with the nearby river's gentle sounds cutting through the silence. Paulette, her gaze distant, murmured, "Water holds the key." "What does that mean?" Jeffries, running a hand through his disheveled hair, looked to the river. "The Ohio River has been the lifeblood of this town. If there's an impending disaster, it's our best lead." Maurice, always the skeptic, frowned. "We can't jump to conclusions. Our first priority is understanding more about this guardian, this Mothman. We need to know its origins." Paulette nodded. "There's an old legend in my family about an ancient Native American ritual that went wrong. Something about appeasing the spirits of the water. Maybe there's a connection." Deciding to split up to cover more ground, Maurice and Jeffries decided to head to the town's historical society, while Paulette would seek out her family's eldest, Aunt Clara, a repository of the town's oldest stories. At the historical society, Maurice and Jeffries were greeted by a room filled with age-old documents, maps, and artifacts. They met Ms. Winthrop, the curator, a frail elderly woman with a sharp gaze. "We're looking for any records or information about the Ohio River," Jeffries began. "Specifically, anything that might link to strange occurrences or legends." Ms. Winthrop arched an eyebrow. "You're not the first to ask about that. The river has always been a source of mystery. Many believe its waters hide secrets, ancient and powerful." She guided them to an old map of Point Pleasant, pointing to a marked area by the river's edge. This was once a sacred site, where rituals were performed. Over time, it was forgotten, and the town was built atop its remnants. Maurice examined the map closely. "Is there anything still left of that site?" Ms. Winthrop hesitated. There's an old well, sealed long ago. Some say it's a portal, a link between our world and others. Meanwhile, Paulette sat across from Aunt Clara, her frail form wrapped in shawls, her eyes gleaming with age-old wisdom. As Paulette recounted their mine encounter, Aunt Clara's expression grew solemn. "You've awakened something," she whispered. "Long ago, our ancestors performed rituals by the river, seeking blessings. One such ritual called forth a guardian from the waters, a being of immense power. But over time, the guardian was forgotten, and its warnings went unheeded." Paulette felt a chill. Is there a way to appease it? To prevent whatever disaster it predicts? Aunt Clara looked out the window towards the river. "The well. It's the link. You must seek it out and perform the ritual of appeasement. But be wary, for the water's spirits are fickle, and the guardian's wrath is mighty." Reuniting at dusk, the trio shared their findings. The urgency to locate the old well grew with each passing hour. Guided by the map from the Historical Society, they journeyed to the river's edge. Hidden amidst overgrown vegetation, they stumbled upon the well's stone structure. Sealed with an ancient-looking lid, adorned with symbols eerily similar to those in the barn. Maurice examined the symbols. These represent elements: water, air, earth, and fire. "We need to recreate the ritual. Paulette, tell us what you remember." They set up around the well, using the few items Paulette remembered from Aunt Clara's tale. A bowl of river water, a lit candle, a handful of earth, and a feather. As they chanted ancient words, the well's lid began to tremble. The water in the bowl rippled, the candle's flame danced erratically, and the earth stirred. A deep hum emanated from the well, vibrating through their very bones. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A deafening silence, and then, a voice. Not the resonant echo from the mine, but a multitude of whispers, intertwining, overlapping. "You seek to appease, to prevent. But the balance has been disturbed. The guardian's presence is but a symptom of a deeper malaise. To prevent the storm, you must heal the rift." The trio exchanged bewildered glances. "What rift?" Jeffries shouted, desperation evident. The voices, now softer, responded, "That which man has wrought." The guardian was but a sentinel. The real danger lies within. As the final word echoed, the well's lid slammed shut. The symbols glowed momentarily before fading, leaving the three in chilling darkness, contemplating the cryptic message. The river flowed silently beside them, its depths holding secrets yet to be unraveled. The next chapter in their quest had just begun. Chapter 7. Fractured Realities. A heavy fog settled over Point Pleasant, casting a spectral pallor across the town. The Ohio River, typically a gleaming blue ribbon, now resembled a murky abyss. The message from the well weighed heavily on the trio's minds, fueling their urgency. They knew that merely appeasing the guardian would not suffice. They had to address the rift. Jeffries scratched his head. "It's like we're in one of those old riddles. What does it mean, that which man has wrought?" Maurice, deep in thought, murmured, "It's not just about the guardian. It's about the town, the river, and its people. We've overlooked something significant." Paulette added, "If the guardian is just a symptom, then the cause, the rift, must be something tangible, something we can touch or see." Their deliberations were interrupted by a cacophony from the town square. Racing towards the noise, they found the townsfolk gathered around a newly erected statue, which bore an uncanny resemblance to the Mothman. A plaque read, "In honor of Point Pleasant's guardian." Maurice frowned. This is commercialization of folklore, turning the guardian into a mere tourist attraction. Jeffries nodded in agreement. This could be the rift the well spoke about, the chasm between truth and exploitation, between reverence and negligence. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the square, and the townsfolk fell silent. A shadow, massive and looming, detached itself from the statue, stretching its wings wide. It was the Mothman, but not the guardian they had met in the mine. This one was menacing, its eyes glowing an intense, angry red. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a void appeared, swallowing the statue whole, leaving a gaping chasm. The Mothman's gaze settled on the trio, a silent accusation in its eyes. Paulette whispered, "This is it. The rift." A chilling voice echoed, not from the Mothman but from the abyss itself. The guardian was a sentinel, a protector. But this is a mockery. A violation of sacred legends. Maurice stepped forward, raising his hands in a placatory gesture. "We didn't create this. We want to help, to restore balance." The Mothman's wings beat furiously, generating a gust so powerful it threatened to sweep them off their feet. As it hovered above the void, its voice boomed, "Then undo this desecration. Return the stories to their sacred origins, and ensure that they remain untainted." The Mothman then soared high, disappearing into the fog, leaving the town square in disarray. The abyss remained, a gaping reminder of their task. The trio regrouped, the weight of their mission now palpable. Jeffries looked grim. "We need to counter this commercialization. We must gather the authentic tales, the true stories of the Guardian, and ensure they're told correctly." Polity's eyes shone with determination. "I'll consult Aunt Clara. She knows the town's lore better than anyone." Maurice nodded. "And we'll rally the townsfolk. This isn't just our battle. The town's very soul is at stake." The following days were a blur of activity. Paulette, with Aunt Clara's guidance, delved deep into the town's archives, gathering stories, legends, and testimonies of past encounters with the Guardian. They discovered tales of protection, of the Mothman warning miners of impending cave-ins or fishermen of stormy waters. The Guardian was not a figure of fear but one of care and watchfulness. Meanwhile, Jeffries and Maurice organized town hall meetings, urging the people of Point Pleasant to reject the commercialized tales and embrace their true heritage. Their passion was infectious, and soon, murals, books, and exhibitions began to crop up, each narrating the authentic tales of the Guardian. One evening, as the town gathered for a vigil by the river, Aunt Clara stepped forward. In her hands, she held an ancient-looking urn. "This," she declared, "contains water from the very depths of the Ohio River, from a time when our bond with the Guardian was strongest." As she poured the water into the river, she began chanting, her voice gaining strength with each word. The townsfolk joined in, their collective voices resonating with hope and plea. The abyss in the town square shimmered and then, gradually, began to close. As the last of the void sealed itself, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows, the Guardian, its appearance now calm and serene. It nodded at the trio, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude, before soaring away, disappearing into the night. The town erupted in cheers, their unity and belief having restored balance. But for Maurice, Jeffries, and Paulette, the journey was just beginning. They had witnessed the thin line between respect and exploitation, between truth and fiction. As they stood by the river, Maurice mused, "Legends aren't just tales. They're a part of our identity, our very essence. We must guard them, just as the Guardian has watched over us." The Ohio River flowed gently, its waters whispering tales of yore, and of guardians who watched over from the shadows. Chapter 8. The tapestry of terror. In the aftermath of the tumultuous events at the town square, Point Pleasant seemed to breathe a sigh of collective relief. But for the trio, that sense of security was a fragile veneer. They knew that the force that had manifested as the angry Mothman was not the only malevolent entity lurking in the shadows. The trio, now bonded by a shared purpose, convened in Aunt Clara's living room. The walls were lined with a tapestry of photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes spanning generations. Clara handed each of them a cup of herbal tea, its aroma sweet and slightly smoky. As they sipped, she began recounting tales handed down in her family. She spoke of a night, nearly a century ago, when a young woman named Isabella vanished without a trace. Desperate searches yielded nothing until her voice, strangely amplified, echoed through the town, recounting her experiences in what seemed like an alternate dimension, a Point Pleasant that was dark, twisted, and mired in perpetual twilight. The narrative shifted to another incident a few decades later, involving a man named Robert. He'd woken up one day to find his reflection not mimicking his actions. Instead, it showed him an alternate life, one where he made different choices, leading to devastating consequences. "These aren't mere legends," Clara whispered gravely. "There's a pattern, a recurring rip in the fabric of our reality. The Guardian keeps most of these malevolent forces at bay, but sometimes the rift grows too wide and entities bleed through." Jeffries leaned forward. "So, the Guardian's anger wasn't just about the statue, but about the town playing with forces it doesn't fully understand." Paulette nodded, her face paling, which means, even though we've restored the Guardian's faith, there are other entities out there, waiting for a chance. Maurice ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "But how do we identify these rifts? And how do we seal them?" Clara pointed towards a dusty old tome on her table. "This has been in my family for generations. It details rituals, incantations, and signs to watch for. It's said to contain the means to seal these rifts." As the trio began to study the tome, a chill ran down their spines. The room's temperature dropped suddenly, and the lights flickered. On the frosty windowpane, a message began to appear, written as if by an invisible hand: "Your meddling will be your undoing." Suddenly, a deafening shriek echoed throughout the house. Racing to the window, they saw shadowy figures, grotesque and twisted, advancing from the woods. The rift, it seemed, was already opening. Maurice was the first to snap into action. "We need to perform the sealing ritual, and quickly." Jeffries scrambled to find the required ingredients mentioned in the tome: salt, sage, and a pendant that had been in a family for generations. Clara handed him an old necklace, its pendant a shimmering opal. Paulette started forming a salt circle, while Maurice lit sage, letting its cleansing smoke fill the room. Jeffries, with the pendant clasped tightly, began the incantation, his voice clear and resonant. But outside, the figures grew in number, their faces pressed against the window, eyes void of any emotion. As the ritual progressed, the ground trembled, and a thunderous roar filled the air. The rift was resisting the sealing. With one final, collective chant, a blinding light emanated from the pendant, shooting towards the sky, illuminating the advancing figures and causing them to evaporate into mist. The room settled back to its warm, comforting glow. The ritual had worked, for now. But the message on the window was a haunting reminder. They had garnered the attention of forces far beyond their understanding. The trio knew their journey was far from over. There would be more rifts, more entities, and more battles. But with the tome and their unwavering determination, they were ready. "We've taken the first step in a very long, treacherous journey," Maurice murmured. Jeffries, looking out at the now calm woods, added, "We've seen what's lurking beyond the veil. And we'll be ready for it." Paulette, clutching the tome close, whispered, "Together, we'll ensure Point Pleasant remains protected, no matter the cost." A silent oath was forged that night, one of guardianship, of defiance, and of a shared destiny. As dawn approached, Point Pleasant remained oblivious to the dangers lurking just beyond the periphery, but its newfound protectors were ever vigilant, ever watchful. Chapter 9. Whispers in the wind. In the early hours of the morning, as a haunting fog crept into Point Pleasant, Jeffries found himself standing at the entrance of the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. He was drawn to the solitude of its dense woods, away from the terrors of the previous night. The trees stood tall, like silent sentinels, their shadows dancing eerily as the morning light tried to pierce through the thick canopy. But there was something else, a whisper that beckoned him deeper into the woods. It was as though the forest itself had secrets it wished to share. As he walked, the whispers grew louder, almost discernible. They spoke of days long past, of ancient rituals and guardians that once protected these very lands. Jeffries felt a connection, a deep-rooted tie to the tales the winds carried. Suddenly, the whisper grew urgent, warning him of a hidden danger. A foreboding sensation enveloped him, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He felt he was not alone. From behind a cluster of trees, a figure emerged, bathed in an otherworldly glow. It wasn't the menacing Mothman or one of the grotesque entities they'd recently confronted. Instead, it was a translucent woman, dressed in colonial garb, her face a mask of sorrow. "Who are you?" Jeffries asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her gaze piercing him. "I am Abigail," she replied. "Once a protector of this land, long before your time. The recent disturbances have awakened me from my eternal slumber." Jeffries took a cautious step forward. "Can you help us? There are forces at play we don't fully understand." Abigail's expression softened. "The rifts you speak of have been around since time immemorial. They are doorways to other realities, places of darkness and despair. They must be sealed, or else Point Pleasant will be consumed." "I know," Jeffries murmured, thinking of the previous night's events. "But how can we stop them?" Abigail gestured to the woods around them. "This land is ancient and holds secrets even I am not privy to. But there is a place, deep within these woods, where the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. There, you may find answers." Suddenly, the wind howled, and Abigail's form wavered. "I cannot remain for long," she said hurriedly. "Seek the heart of the forest. But be wary, for it is a place of both enlightenment and peril." As she faded away, Jeffries felt a weight settle upon his shoulders. The heart of the forest, whatever and wherever that was, held answers, and it was up to him and his friends to uncover them. Racing back to town, he relayed his encounter to Paulette and Maurice, both of whom listened with rapt attention. "We must find this heart of the forest," Maurice declared, his usual calm demeanor replaced by determination. Paulette frowned, deep in thought. "It won't be easy. The woods are vast, and who knows what dangers lurk within. We need to be prepared." Over the next few hours, they gathered supplies, maps of the area, protective talismans from Aunt Clara, and provisions for the journey. As they set off, the weight of their mission pressing down on them, they could only hope they'd find the answers they sought. The deeper they ventured into the woods, the denser the fog became. The world around them felt surreal, as though they were walking through a dream. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant bird call, seemed magnified, adding to the palpable tension. As night fell, they set up camp near a bubbling stream. But sleep was elusive, as each was lost in their thoughts about the challenges ahead. In the dead of night, a scream pierced the air, a scream that seemed all too familiar to Jeffries. He bolted upright, scanning the darkness. Not far from their campsite, a figure struggled, its wings ensnared in what appeared to be ethereal chains. The Mothman. But this time, The creature's eyes didn't glow with malevolence. Instead, they were filled with pain and desperation. Without a word, the trio approached, their earlier fear replaced by a shared understanding. The Mothman, for all its might, was just as much a victim of the rifts as they were. Using the same ritual they'd performed earlier, they managed to free the creature. As its wings spread wide, it let out a mournful cry, not of anger, but of gratitude. Then, with a powerful leap, it disappeared into the night. Exhausted, the group returned to their camp, their minds racing. The lines between friend and foe, reality and myth, were blurring. As dawn broke, they continued their journey, driven by a single purpose, to find the heart of the forest and the answers it held. And as the sun's first rays pierced the canopy, illuminating a clearing up ahead, they realized they had arrived. The heart of the forest, an ancient grove filled with trees whose trunks twisted in intricate patterns, awaited them. But they were not alone. Shadowy figures, reminiscent of the entities they'd faced earlier, circled the grove, guarding its secrets. The trio steeled themselves, knowing that the answers they sought lay within, and they'd have to confront the guardians of the grove to find them. Chapter 10. The guardians of the grove. The dense fog that had blanketed the forest all morning seemed to retreat at the entrance of the grove, revealing the pulsating heart of the woods. It was as though they had stumbled upon an ethereal cathedral, with trees standing like stone pillars, their limbs intertwining to form intricate mosaics of life and shadow. A hushed reverence permeated the air, and every step taken by Jeffries, Paulette, and Maurice seemed to echo throughout the ages. But the tranquility of the grove was deceptive. As they ventured further in, they felt eyes upon them. Suddenly, the once peaceful clearing felt suffocating. The trees seemed to lean in closer, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own volition. From the corner of his eye, Jeffries saw them first. Figures, cloaked in darkness, moving silently among the trees. Their presence was felt more than seen, a weight in the air that was almost palpable. They were the guardians of the grove, entities older than memory, sworn to protect the sacred heart of the forest from those who would seek to disturb it. Drawing upon the knowledge bestowed upon them by Aunt Clara, the trio formed a protective circle, chanting incantations meant to ward off malevolent spirits. But the guardians were powerful, unaffected by their efforts. They continued their silent advance, the very air around them crackling with energy. Paulette, ever the researcher, recalled a legend about the grove. "They're bound to the trees," she exclaimed. "The trees give them power. We need to break the connection." Acting on instinct, Maurice began to sing. It was a haunting melody, one that had been passed down through generations in his family. The song spoke of respect for nature, of coexistence and harmony. As his voice rose, the atmosphere within the grove began to shift. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a feeling of unity and understanding. Jeffries and Paulette joined in, their voices merging with Maurice's in a chorus that resonated throughout the forest. The guardians paused in their advance, seeming to listen intently. The trees themselves seemed to sway in time with the melody, their leaves rustling softly. As the final notes of the song faded, the guardians, no longer menacing shadows but ethereal figures of light, bowed their heads in acknowledgement. The bond between them and the grove had not been broken but transformed. The trio had earned their respect. In the center of the grove stood a massive tree, its bark covered in ancient runes. Drawn to it, Jeffries approached and placed a hand upon its trunk. Memories, not his own but those of the forest itself, flooded his mind. He saw the grove in its infancy, a haven for creatures of myth and legend. He witnessed ceremonies of old, where the guardians were invoked to protect the heart of the woods. And he felt the pain of the rifts, the tearing of the fabric between realms that threatened to consume all. Pulling away, Jeffries shared his vision with Paulette and Maurice. "The grove has shown me what needs to be done," he whispered. "We must seal the rifts, not just in Point Pleasant, but everywhere they appear. The balance must be restored." Determined, the trio prepared to leave the grove, armed with newfound knowledge and purpose. But as they made their way to the entrance, a figure stepped into their path. It was Abigail, the colonial-era spirit Jeffries had encountered earlier. "You have done well," she said, her voice echoing with the wisdom of ages. "But the journey ahead will be perilous. The rifts are but a symptom of a deeper malady, one that has taken root in the very soul of this world." She handed Jeffries a small pendant, shaped like a tree with roots that seemed to dig deep into the earth. "This will guide you," she said. "When the time comes, you will know what to do." With that, she disappeared, leaving the trio to contemplate the gravity of their mission. They had delved into the heart of the forest and emerged with a purpose. The fate of Point Pleasant, and perhaps the world, rested in their hands. As they made their way back to town, the challenges that lay ahead weighed heavily on their minds. But they also felt a newfound sense of unity and determination. The rifts would be sealed, balance would be restored, and the legends of Point Pleasant would once again become just that, legends. We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.